lovelies. Bit late on the comments because I was busy Friday banking sleep because it was the first tabletopless back after a very long break and everything. So I'm going to do the comments today. And don't forget, I am running Earth Dawn tonight over on the Grimstreams channel. And the hour in the UK has changed, so I got an extra lie-in this morning. Let's start with the Kalergi comments this time, because I'm feeling feisty. So Raphael says that Europe must accept diversity while Israel genocides its diversity. Gaza isn't part of Israel, for one. And Israel does have a lot of people from a lot of different countries. There are a lot of Israeli Arabs. There are a lot of people from a wide variety of countries and nationalities and ethnicities living within Israel. So no, they are not genociding their diversity. I mean, our hearts all break, I'm sure, apart from you. This must be very confusing for racists about what has happened, both in regard to the attacks on Israel to start with and the inevitable, unstoppable horrors of what is going on now in Gaza. But it's not a genocide, and Israel is not genociding its diversity in any case. Jeremy says, one of the top names in England, I think he meant England, this year is Mohammed. It has been for a few years. Now, all it takes is a very small amount of thought to figure out why this might be and why it's not a harbinger of doom for people in the UK. British people, natives, as you might say, are already fairly multicultural. And even within that, right, white British people have a huge variety of names that they can be called, that they are called. And we half-inch names from other cultures and use them as well. Weird American-style nomenclature comes over here, people name their kids things like that. It's probably only a matter of time until someone names their baby girl Chlamydia because they think it sounds beautiful. This isn't so much the case within Islamic cultures. There are a hell of a lot of Mohammeds. There's not as much diversity, ironically, in naming within these cultures. So if we have a much larger population, but we have many, many times the amount of names that kids might be called, is it really surprising that a culture that seems to name every other kid Muhammad might have more in a numerical sense? Not really. It takes a full 5 minutes of research on Google and a little bit of critical thinking to figure this one out, especially when you realize that there are many different spellings of Muhammad and they all get conflated together. And seriously, Islamic culture, learn to name your kids things other than Muhammad. It must be interminably dull if you go to a school in, I don't know, Leeds or Bradford and listen to the register being taken. Muhammad? Here, sir. Muhammad? Here, sir. Aisha? Yes, sir. Muhammad? With a U? Here, sir. Dull. There are other names. Right. Truth Spasm Media, I think that's what it is. It's tricky without capitalization. Says, this guy asks why it's an issue having whites be a minority, which we're not in any threat of being anytime soon. All while it's very clear that so far it has led to increasing violent crime, theft, rape, and overall degeneration of Western culture. This is embarrassing to watch. Call it a conspiracy, whatever you want. It doesn't matter what terminology you use. There's mountains of evidence that supports the reality rather than this denialism. So show me the plan in the book. That's the evidence that you need to demonstrate that this conspiracy theory is true. Because the conspiracy theory claim is that Count Coudenhove-Kalergi laid out a plan for what is happening in the West in his book, which he doesn't. It can be hard to find an English copy of the book, but I recommend that you try. Unfortunately, one of the only places you seem to be able to get an English translation is from Racist Fuckwits, but even in their translation, there is no plan in the book. Also, none of these claims are true. Violent crime overall is down significantly since the 90s, and so it goes with most of this stuff. As for theft, burglary, muggings, and so on, these tend to correlate with relative levels of poverty, both in a nation as a whole and within areas of depredation. And if you're an immigrant, you're basically coming in and starting at pretty much the lowest level in any society, and that poverty can be quite intractable. It's not quite as bad here as it is in the US, because we have the creaking remnants of a welfare system that helps increase social mobility while they have guns, but still it's difficult to get out of that. So it's not accurate or correct or intelligent or a sign of critical thinking to think that it's because of their colour or whatever. The majority cause of crime is relative levels of poverty, and that tends to correlate with minority populations and with immigrant populations. So go stick your head in a pig. Thutmose Amos says, he quoted a Darwin quote, which he's taking as being some sort of condoning of genocide or something. Darwin, much like Kalergi, was merely observing what was going on and not approving. Certainly by today's standards, Darwin would be considered racist, and a lot of his language would be considered racist. But social Darwinism wasn't him. It wasn't what his theory says at all. The implications of evolutionary theory are what have shown us we're all one big human family, all related, all, broadly speaking, equal. That has been a scientific truth that is also a useful social truth, that we're all interrelated to each other and to all life on Earth. Some people just haven't seemed to take that to mind, I suppose. Thutmose also is one of these white supremacist people who likes to pretend that he's some sort of Muslim infiltrator in order to put some meat on the bones of his conspiracy theories. So there were some other laughable comments, soon, white devil, we will outnumber you, then we will hold the whip. Moustache twirling bollocks. I never will understand humans. Nazord Dabwars, apparently, says, I like how you name two of the smallest minority populations when you refer to how well immigrants integrate into our society. Let's ignore the two largest, who have their own cities, and of which even the third generations have a plus 3.5 birth rate. Where do live? I'm not sure what that last bit is. Why is their grasp of English always terrible? Oh yeah, they're thick as mince. People certainly had the same fears that you are expressing about these other immigrant populations that I mentioned before. I think that was West Indian and South Asian communities. Why we call them South Asians now rather than Indian or Pakistani, I don't know, but apparently that's what the terminology is now. It's a state of mind into integration, and it's something that happens best with support, but people had the same paranoid issues with those populations. So what the fuck are you even talking about? AMT says, so this did not age well, which is another one of those look a tree comments. What didn't age well? There is still no evidence of any plan or scheme or anything going on within the pages of practical idealism. What are you talking about? Eck says, are you blind or just stupid? Don't you see mostly white women with black guys or white guys with Asian women? You don't call that mixing? Why isn't this happening in Africa? Tell me. Well, it has happened a lot in African nations, mostly ones with a legacy of colonialism. But it doesn't happen a lot because a lot of people aren't moving to African nations, because Africa tends to be corrupt and poor and dangerous, and so is not necessarily high on people's emigration destination checklist. It's also why lots of people are leaving a lot of African and Middle Eastern and other countries. What is wrong with mixing? Don't I mostly see white women with black guys or white guys with Asian women? I don't think that's anybody's business who people choose to be with or fuck. Stay out of people's bedrooms, you creep. If you want to go and have lots of white Aryan babies, well, first you're going to need to lose enough weight that you can see your penis, and then you're going to have to find someone willing, and Godspeed. They get stupider, and the whole Israel thing has definitely stirred up the online racist contingent. Alright, moving on. Planescape. Kedhup says, I hate that some of my favourite settings like Dark Sun and Al-Qadim will never be officially touched upon again because they have problematic elements. Come on, if you're going to keep getting rid of all sources of contention, evil and opposition because they're problematic, then what the hell do we have to be big dumb heroes against? Not all games should be light-hearted comedy, Euro fantasy dungeon crawls. Sometimes we want to feel that desperation, that horror and that fight against the darkness. Mind you, maybe I'm happy Wizards doesn't touch this shit anymore, they'll just ruin it. I think that is the sentiment that a lot of people are having, especially now, post-Planescape. Though I will say again, they did a better job with Planescape than they did with Spelljammer. It's just they kind of sucked all the vital juices out of Planescape that made it so individual, so engaging, mature and interesting. Though some of that is not actually down to Planescape itself as a product, rather it is down to the fact that everything is Planescape these days. So, you know, that's a big part of the problem. One that's perhaps a little more obscure or doesn't get as much love, which I'm fairly glad they're not going to do again, would be Birthright. See, Birthright really nestles down into that problematic trope of being born to rule, and particular bloodlines of heroes and so on. That's not acceptable these days. And, you know, in my real life, you know, my politics are certainly against the idea of a divine right of kings or magical bloodlines or whatever else. You know, my ancestors decapitated a king, for God's sake. But it's a shame because that's fine in fiction. It's a trope in a lot of fiction, a lot of history, a lot of mythology, you know, demigods and so on. And yet it is kind of missing. It was refreshing when it appeared in Unlondon by China Mayville, the sort of young adult fantasy book, where the chosen one turns out not to be so chosen after all. But it's a long-lasting trope for a reason. It taps into all that mythology for a reason, and it's kind of a shame we won't see anything like that ever again. Very unfortunate. Okay, moving on to the lore dump I did for Tabletop Plus Vampire, which I may do similar things for other games. Jack Fetch says, sounds spectacular. I'm a big fan of the V5 lore, if not the mechanics. Well, I've kind of wedged a whole bunch of stuff together and changed some things, but it certainly starts from a basis of the Fall of London module, which we didn't play through, but I took some NPCs and some ideas out of that, mixed some of it with things from my time in the LARP Society, and some things from my old tabletop games. So yeah, it should be interesting if we can keep things going, but it's going to take a lot of support and time to build Tabletop Plus back up to something like where it was. So your patronage would be appreciated. I know adult stuff isn't everybody's cup of tea, but yeah, it would be appreciated. Ensign Breadcoat says, Grimm's just managed to make V5 lore sound actually interesting. Excuse me while I go and self-flagellate such awful notions away. Joking aside, I've not watched Tabletop Plus before, but I might have to catch this one. Yeah, I don't know how much of the lore that I've created or stolen or modified necessarily makes itself known during the game, but I find it useful to have these things in the background and grounding the play that does take place. Mercutio says, you did a fantastic job of running London. I always felt you were very much in tune with the history and setting, referring back to when I was actually the LARP storyteller for London in the Camarilla LARP Society, which was weird because I didn't live in London, but hopefully I did a good job. A lot of people seemed to like what I was doing, and a lot of people didn't. So much petty politics outside of the game in the Camarilla. Good times and the worst times, both. I missed a comment about Planescape. So according to Feral Gamers, slipcases do not count as boxes, so there is no VAT extra charge for games that are in slipcases. That would explain why we are seeing slipcase books published more than box set RPG supplements published. I don't know what the rule is in other countries, but clearly there's enough of an RPG audience in the UK for that to be the case. There have been a few slipcases that have come with stuff in them as if they were a board game, like special dice or whatever else. I don't know whether they get away with it or not. That would seem to be taking the piss slightly to me, but it's good to know that that's the case. So I hit 6k subs. We're now double digits over that, which was nice. Some people commented on that with various things, not necessarily related to the video topic. Agrafala Albion says, since Christmas is coming up, I've wishlisted 2 books for my family to buy for me. Inside Gamergate, A Social History of the Gamer Revolt by me, and Mediated, How the Media Shapes Your World and the Way You Live in It. I wonder if these two are serendipitous. It's the 9th anniversary of Gamergate in September. Will be the 10th next year. A lot of people seem to be taking the opportunity to look back. A guy called Tachyon I did a interview with, obviously, recently, and he's working on a new book about it. And he's brought together a bunch of anti-Gamergate people and pro-Gamergate people to have discussions and interviews and so on. And unfortunately, from what I've seen, the anti-Gamergate people have learned nothing whatsoever from their experience or how things worked out. They still can't admit that they were wrong in any way, shape or form, or that they made the situation worse, or even in many cases that there was a problem. Even if they do admit that there was a problem, somehow there's a disjunct, and they still blame Gamergate for Trump and the online atmosphere and issues of trust and so on that we've developed since. I think in a roundabout way on that last part they're right, but it's not Gamergate's fault. It was the response to Gamergate that created the gap between the media and the media's consumers. It's like the opposite of the Gelman amnesia effect. People all seem to have figured out that if the media could get something so utterly and completely wrong as just reporting on video games, why should they be trusted on anything else? Right? And so the entirety of media got discredited, not just by Gamergate, but I think that was a cultural touchstone of people losing faith, losing trust in the media, and they brought that on themselves to a very large extent. So there's something in the wind about all of this. K-Mike says, no one decides to be an OSR guy, you just wake up one day demanding strict timetables. But seriously, congrats on the 6k. I've borrowed some of Skip Breakfast's headlines for my own Red games, so I'm down to hear more of your thoughts on cyberpunk lore. Yeah, I thought I might do like the lore that exists from 2020 about certain cities and locations in cyberpunk lore, and then update that for the Red, and then maybe update it again for 2077, just based on my speculations and thoughts and little fragments of lore from here and there. So I might still do that. I think the lore dump video for Vampire was interesting to do, so I think I might do a bit more here and there like that. I'm trying to figure out what it is that I like and would watch, and do more of that. Jace of Fire says, I would be interested in seeing your take on a game that covers mental health. Most examples I can think of rely heavily on safety tools, and I'd be curious to see what an alternative would look like. My game, Imagination, is kind of my take on that. Something breaks in reality, and the mainland of the United Kingdom gets kind of swept over by reality distorting stuff, and only mad people are able to really cope with it and even manipulate it somewhat. So yeah, no safety tools there. After all, real life has no safety tools, then there are no safety tools for dealing with your mental illness. Pete's Dracolich says, a good name by the way, I'd like to see you write some short modules, like 2 to 4 session Grim Gym content. I think you're a fantastic writer for what you said about Dark Sun. You can build a community on your artistic style rather than a specific setting. It reminds me of some of my favourite music artists that I look for even when featuring on other artists' albums. I say this because even though I've never run Morkborg, I still try to pick up all its content because I could drop it into any game I play. Just a thought. Peace. I'm not big on modules, as is probably apparent from many of my reviews. So me writing a module would be like Lemmy playing a Taylor Swift song. But I will give it some thought. Maybe I can find a middle ground between adventure seeds and modules and do something with that. Mr. Prickly says, you had me at create more adult content. Seriously though, I'd like to see you produce the kinds of content you would like to see on YouTube. Well, yeah, that's the question. What do I want to see? What do I actually stop and watch? What would I stop and watch that isn't being made these days? And of course, we're dealing with a tidal wave of advertisements on YouTube overcoming all the ad blocking. So, yeah, it remains to be seen how that's going to affect things. See you next time. Zang.
For
Fatal Highway is a set of post-apocalyptic road war rules for Fate. This is a quick set of tried and tested rules for vehicles, vehicle chases, vehicle weapons, and operating at scale. This version also contains some ideas written up for a Fate version of 45 Psychobilly Retropocalypse. This booklet is all about cars, chases, crashes, and some post-apocalyptic inspiration for those who want to play Road Warriors. You can purchase it at post-mort.com, lulu.com, and DriveThruRPG.
Grim gave a big yawn and settled down to sleep. And of course, when Grim goes to sleep, all of his friends go to sleep too. The people on the internet were just text on a screen, the collectibles were just cheap plastic tat, and the books were just elaborate sandwiches made of wood and paper. Even Grim himself, once he was asleep, was just an old saggy goth twat, baggy and a bit loose at the seams, and nobody loved him.